The chamber hummed with an eerie silence, a void of sound that stretched across the grand circular table where the most powerful beings in the galaxy sat. High above them, the polished glass of the council chamber reflected the vastness of space, where warships hovered in silent menace. The air was thick with the unspoken certainty of an impending war, except for one person. Eleanor Voss swirled the deep red wine in her glass, a small, knowing smile tugging at the corner of her lips. She lounged in the ornate chair at the head of Earth's delegation, her posture a deliberate contradiction to the tension suffocating the room. The Galactic Empire's warlords and emissaries sat rigid, their collective gaze burning into her, waiting for the moment she would break under the weight of their ultimatum. Grand Marshal Zyvor, a towering brute of a being with armor that seemed to absorb the very light around him, leaned forward. His golden eyes gleamed like molten metal, narrowing at the infuriatingly calm human before him. When he spoke, his voice resonated through the chamber like distant thunder. Earth will kneel. Surrender your world, your fleets, and your sovereignty, or we will raise your planet to cinders. He raised a hand, and a three-dimensional projection flickered to life above the table. A burning world, its continents fractured, oceans boiling. This will be your fate. Eleanor took a slow sip of her wine. You really need to work on your sales pitch, Zyvor, she said, voice smooth, unfazed. I imagine you terrify lesser civilizations with your theatrics, but do you truly believe Earth fears extinction? Zyvor's nostrils flared. He had expected defiance, but not this casual dismissal. Your species is reckless, but you are not immortal. You are outnumbered, outgunned, and outclassed. The Empire has crushed entire star systems for less than the insult you present now. Eleanor set down her glass, finally sitting forward, letting her piercing gaze meet his. And yet you haven't crushed us, she murmured. Why is that? Why are we even having this discussion if you're so certain of our defeat? Murmurs rippled through the assembled council members. Some cast wary glances at Zyvor, while others observed Eleanor with a newfound curiosity. It was a dangerous game she played, but one she had mastered long ago, turning threats into negotiations, ultimatums into conversations. Zyvor's lip curled. We offer you the chance to surrender with dignity. The alternative is far less pleasant. Eleanor exhaled a small laugh. Dignity? Oh, forgive me. I didn't realize burning entire civilizations alive was the Empire's idea of diplomacy. She leaned back, studying the gathered warlords. You're here because your past conquests were easy. Your enemies fell before you, trembling and desperate. But humans? We don't break that way. Zyvor's fist slammed against the table, making the room shudder. Do not mistake our patience for mercy. Eleanor remained utterly still, her amusement unwavering. I don't. I mistake it for fear. The words hung in the air like a live wire. Several council members shifted uneasily. Eleanor pressed forward before Zyvor could respond. You've encountered our forces before. Small skirmishes, sure. You crushed colonies, destroyed fleets, but you never faced Earth's full might. She folded her hands. And the problem with fighting humans is that we don't fight fair. We never have. Zyvor's eyes darkened. You are flesh and bone, nothing more. Eleanor tilted her head. And yet, here you are, threatening but not attacking. Which means one of two things: you know an outright war against Earth won't be the swift victory you claim, or you're not as united as you pretend to be. Silence. The stillness stretched long enough that even the holograms of distant warships seemed frozen in time. Some of the alien dignitaries glanced at one another. That tiny crack of doubt, the one Zyvor desperately tried to keep hidden, had just been exposed. Eleanor let the weight of it settle before she delivered the killing blow. So, instead of throwing billions of lives into a war that may not end in your favor, let's settle this differently. She tapped the armrest of her chair. A champion from Earth, a champion from the Empire. One battle. No fleets, no collateral damage. The victor determines the fate of Earth. The uproar was instantaneous. Several council members shouted in outrage, while others looked intrigued. The sheer audacity of the offer sent a ripple of chaos through the chamber. Zyvor's gaze burned into her, but for the first time, there was something else behind it. Uncertainty. She had backed him into a corner where refusing would be an admission of weakness. When he finally spoke, it was not with the roar of a warlord, but the measured tone of someone who had no choice but to play the game. You are either the bravest fool I have ever met, or the most dangerous woman in this galaxy. Eleanor smirked. Why not both? The crowd roared as the arena's energy barriers flickered to life, their hum barely masking the cacophony of voices echoing across the vast, metallic coliseum. Billions across the galaxy watched through holographic feeds, eyes locked on the ground below, where two figures stood at opposite ends of the battlefield. Eleanor Voss watched from a private viewing platform high above, arms crossed, lips pursed in something resembling satisfaction. She had played the game well. Now, it was time for Earth's chosen champion to prove her words true. Jason Holt flexed his fingers inside his armored gloves, rolling his shoulders as he eyed the monster before him. Zorthal the Annihilator was a behemoth, standing nearly 10 feet tall, a mountain of corded muscle and scarred flesh. His four arms bristled with gleaming plasma blades, each humming with a lethal promise. Jason had read the reports. Zorthal had waded through battlefields soaked in blood, had torn through entire divisions of warriors without breaking a sweat. The Galactic Empire had bred him for one purpose: destruction. Jason, by contrast, looked almost mundane. A human in a sleek, matte black combat suit, lean but muscular, with no obvious weapons visible. But that was the thing about humans, they never looked like much until it was too late. Grand Marshal Zyvor stood at the edge of the arena, his golden eyes burning with anticipation. He lifted a clawed hand, signaling for silence. The noise in the Colosseum died in an instant. This battle will determine Earth's fate, Zyvor declared, his voice carrying across the arena. A duel of champions, as agreed upon by the Council. No outside interference. No retreat. Victory is determined by death or surrender. His lip curled slightly at that last word, as if the very idea of surrender was a disease upon his tongue. Jason exhaled slowly, his breath steady. He wasn't here to die. He wasn't here to fight fair. He was here to win. The energy barriers around the arena pulsed, signaling the start of the duel. Zorthal moved first, a blur of motion that defied his bulk. He lunged forward with terrifying speed, all four plasma blades arcing toward Jason in a synchronized dance of death. The ground trembled beneath his charge, his sheer momentum enough to crush steel. Jason sidestepped at the last second, pivoting with the kind of precision only a lifetime of training and cybernetic augmentation could provide. The blades missed by inches, scorching the air where he had stood a heartbeat ago. Zorthal snarled, adjusting mid-strike, bringing two of his lower arms around in a sweeping arc. Jason ducked, sliding under the attack before flipping backward to create distance. He landed in a low crouch, eyes calculating. The Empire's champion was strong, fast, and used to overwhelming his opponents with brute force. That meant he was used to fights being over quickly. Jason intended to drag this out. Zorthal roared, surging forward again, his movements fueled by frustration. He had expected a slaughter. Instead, his prey danced just beyond his reach, slipping through gaps in his attacks with infuriating ease. Jason kept moving, forcing the larger warrior to expend energy. He dodged, sidestepped, and rolled, every motion calculated to avoid direct engagement. The arena floor cracked beneath Zorthal's missed strikes, each one powerful enough to tear through reinforced armor. The crowd murmured. They had come expecting spectacle, but what they saw was something else entirely. A human, small, unarmed, seemingly outmatched, was toying with the Empire's greatest warrior. Zorthal snarled, halting his assault. He narrowed his glowing red eyes, breathing heavily. Coward, he spat. Fight me. Jason smirked, finally speaking for the first time. I am. And then he moved. It was subtle at first. A shift in pace, a change in direction. Instead of purely evading, Jason began striking quick, precise hits aimed at the joints, at the small vulnerabilities in Zorthal's armor. A knee to the side, a strike to the wrist, a sharp blow to the ribs. None of them were enough to bring the warrior down, but they were accumulating. Zorthal swung wildly, his frustration mounting. Jason ducked under a horizontal slash, twisted mid-motion, and drove his elbow into the alien's side. Something cracked. Zorthal staggered back, eyes wide in disbelief. No one had ever made him take a step back before. Jason exhaled, shaking out his fists. Still think I'm a coward? The behemoth snarled and charged again. But this time, Jason was ready. He sidestepped, planted a foot, and used Zorthal's own momentum against him. The larger warrior stumbled forward, off balance for the first time in his life. And that's when Jason struck. He moved like a shadow, closing the gap in an instant. His fist connected with the alien's jaw, a strike enhanced by the kinetic amplifiers built into his combat suit. Zorthal's head snapped to the side, a sound like thunder rolling through the arena. The behemoth stumbled. Jason pressed the advantage. He struck again, ribs, throat, knee. A flurry of movements too fast for the eye to follow. Zorthal roared in pain and fury, swinging his blades wildly. But Jason was already gone, slipping behind him like a ghost. The crowd gasped as Jason planted both feet and launched himself into the air. He twisted mid-flight, wrapped an arm around Zorthal's thick neck, and drove his entire weight downward. The maneuver sent the behemoth crashing to the ground in a deafening impact. Zorthal tried to rise, but Jason was already there, pressing his forearm against the alien's throat, cutting off his air. The Empire's champion struggled, his forearms flailing, trying to dislodge the human. But Jason held firm, his voice a whisper meant only for his opponent. Yield. Zorthal's vision blurred. He was stronger, he was faster, but none of it mattered. Jason had read him, dissected him, broken him down piece by piece. And now he was dying. The behemoth's hands trembled. His pride screamed at him to keep fighting, to die with honor. But there was something worse than death, humiliation. With his last breath, Zorthal's fist slammed against the ground. A universal signal. Surrender. The arena fell into absolute silence. Then uproar. The Galactic Council exploded into chaos. The warlords, the dignitaries, the politicians, everyone spoke at once. Zyvor stood frozen, his face unreadable. His golden eyes locked onto the battlefield where his champion lay broken. Eleanor Voss smirked and lifted her glass. Well, she murmured, taking a sip. That settles that. The aftermath of the duel sent shockwaves through the Galactic Empire. The council chamber was filled with the murmurs of astonished dignitaries, their once imposing presence diminished by the weight of what had just transpired. The unthinkable had happened. A human had bested one of their greatest warriors. More than that, the Empire had been forced to recognize Earth as an equal, rather than an easy conquest. Eleanor Voss stood at the center of it all, still holding her wine glass, still as composed as ever. She had known this would happen. She had counted on it. The moment the terms of the duel had been accepted, the outcome had already been written. Grand Marshal Zyvor had yet to move from his seat at the head of the War Council. His jaw was clenched, his golden eyes fixed on the reports flashing across the holoscreens before him. The official declaration of Earth sovereignty was already being drafted, the treaty set to be signed within hours. His fingers curled into fists. You set this up from the beginning, he finally said, his voice measured, though the rage beneath it was palpable. Eleanor's smile was almost sympathetic. Of course I did. Zyvor's lip curled in disdain. Your arrogance will be your downfall, human. Eleanor took a deliberate sip of her wine before responding. You misunderstand me, Zyvor. This wasn't about arrogance. It was about survival. She set the glass down, her expression turning serious. You thought Earth would be like the others, that we'd fold, surrender, or throw ourselves into a war we couldn't win. But humans, we don't break the way you expect. Zyvor stood suddenly, the force of his movement rattling the table. The other warlords and diplomats flinched, but Eleanor remained utterly still, watching him with that same infuriating calm. You are not untouchable, Zyvor growled. The Empire has existed for millennia. You've won this battle, but make no mistake. Our war is not over. Eleanor exhaled a quiet laugh. See, that's where you're wrong. She leaned forward, folding her hands on the table. This war was over the moment you let me choose the terms of battle. A tense silence fell between them. Zyvor's mind was already racing ahead, weighing the consequences. The Galactic Empire was built on conquest, on absolute dominance. And yet, if they struck now, after agreeing to the terms of the duel, they would expose themselves as liars, oathbreakers. It would shatter the illusion of their honor, and with it, the loyalty of their subjugated worlds. No, the war really was over, and Earth had won it without ever firing a single shot. Eleanor pushed her chair back and stood, smoothing out her jacket. I believe we have a treaty to sign. Zyvor did not reply, but she could feel the hatred radiating from him, the barely contained fury of a man who had been outmaneuvered and knew it. But hatred was irrelevant. The warlords could seethe, the politicians could plot, but the reality remained unchanged. Earth was no longer a target. It was an equal. Jason Holt, still recovering from his fight, leaned against the wall near the exit as Eleanor approached. You enjoy poking the bear, don't you? He muttered, his voice low enough that only she could hear. She smirked. Poking the bear keeps it from eating us. Jason huffed a quiet laugh, shaking his head. So what now? Eleanor cast one last glance at the assembled council, their hushed discussions, their barely concealed fury. Then she turned and walked toward the exit. Now, she said, we make sure they never forget what happened here today.